Whispers of a world of culture. Italy, where ancient beauty meets eternal light. A sleep story and cultural journey. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine standing at the edge of a great boot-shaped peninsula, stretching southward into the warm waters of the Mediterranean Sea. To your north, the jagged peaks of the Alps rise like a wall of ancient stone against the pale sky, their summits dusted with snow even in summer, their glacial valleys quiet and green below. To your east, the Adriatic shimmers, a long, gentle sea, its waters shallow and clear along the coast, its horizons wide and luminous. To your south, the Tyrrhenian rolls against volcanic shores and golden beaches, and beyond, the island jewels of Sicily and Sardinia wait in their own particular light. And here, at the heart of this extraordinary geography, a country breathes, layered, generous, endlessly beautiful. This is Italy. Welcome, gently, to one of the most storied lands in the history of the world, a place where civilizations have risen and fallen and left behind monuments of such astonishing beauty that the very act of looking at them seems to slow time itself. Italy is a country that seems to exist at a different frequency from the rest of the world. Warmer, more colorful, more alive in its relationship to food and music and conversation and the simple pleasures of being present on the earth. It is a country that has given humanity more art, more architecture, more opera, more cuisine, more fashion, and more philosophy than perhaps any other in the recorded past. And yet it wears all of this with a lightness, an ease, a way of living in the present moment that is its own kind of genius. As we begin this long, slow journey together, there is no need to rush. Let the landscape arrive gently, at its own pace. Imagine the light as it falls across the Tuscan hills in the long afternoons of late summer, the way it turns the cypress trees to dark flame against the pale gold of the harvested fields, the way it softens the ancient stone of a farmhouse wall into something warm and almost edible. Imagine the sound of church bells carrying across a small hilltop town in the morning quiet, the swallows wheeling above the piazza, the smell of coffee drifting from an open doorway. This is the Italy that lives in the imagination of the world, and it is not a fantasy, it is real, and it is here. Italy's geography is one of extraordinary variety. The northern regions are as different from the southern as winter is from summer. In the northeast, the Dolomites rise in extraordinary formations, their sheer limestone walls striped in pink and grey and white, their summits catching the last of the evening light in a phenomenon the people of the region call the enrosadura, or the alpenglow, when the mountains seem to blaze from within with a rose-gold fire. The valleys below are cool and forested, their meadows dotted with wooden farmhouses, their rivers cold and fast. Moving westward across the north, the great Po Valley unfolds, Italy's most productive agricultural plain, flat and misty in autumn and winter, its fields giving way to the rice paddies of the Versaillese and the vineyards of Piedmont. The Po River runs through this landscape for hundreds of kilometers, broad and slow, its banks lined with poplars that quiver silver in the slightest breeze. Milan rises from this plain, not the Italy of postcards and ruins, but the Italy of design and finance and fashion, a city of extraordinary energy and sophistication whose beauty is partly concealed and partly revealed by its grey winter skies. The Italian lakes, Como, Maggiore, Garda, belong to a landscape that seems almost too beautiful to be real. These long, narrow bodies of water, carved by ancient glacier and framed by mountains and hillside villages and elaborate villas, have a quality of theatrical perfection that has drawn the wealthy and the artistic for centuries. The light on Lake Como in the early morning, when the mist still lies on the water and the mountains above are just beginning to catch the sun, is the kind of light that painters have spent lifetimes trying to capture. South of the Po Valley, the Apennine Mountains run like a spine the entire length of the peninsula, from the Ligurian coast in the northwest to the toe of the boot in Calabria. These are not the dramatic peaks of the Alps but something older and more worn, rounded ridges, wooded flanks, deep valleys where isolated villages have been following the same seasonal rhythms for 1,000 years. The Apennines shape the climate and the agriculture of everything around them, and the diversity of Italian culture from region to region is partly a function of this complex, varied terrain. Tuscany is perhaps the landscape that the world most associates with Italy, and with good reason. The hills between Florence and Siena, with their vineyards and olive groves, their cypresses and their stone farmhouses, their improbably picturesque hilltop towns, represent a kind of idealized Mediterranean beauty that has influenced painting and literature and film around the world. The Val d'Orcia, in the south of Tuscany, is a UNESCO World Heritage landscape, a place where the curves of the hills and the geometry of the fields and the placement of the trees create compositions so perfect they seem designed rather than grown. Further south, the landscape becomes drier and more dramatic. The volcanic soil of Campania produces some of the world's most flavorful tomatoes and the grapes of the Aglianico vine. Vesuvius rises above the Bay of Naples, a brooding presence, its crater visible from the city below, its slopes covered with small farms and villages that have grown back over the centuries despite everything the mountain has done to them. The Amalfi coast, carved into the cliffs above the Tyrrhenian Sea, is a place of vertiginous beauty. The roads cut into the rock face, the villages clinging to the slopes, the sea below a color somewhere between turquoise and cobalt that seems to belong to no ordinary palette. In the deep south, in Basilicata and Calabria and Apulia, Italy becomes a different country, older, quieter, more austere, and in its own way more beautiful. The Sassi of Matera, a city of cave dwellings inhabited for thousands of years and once considered a symbol of poverty, now appears as one of the most extraordinary urban landscapes in Europe. The Trulli of Alberobello, their whitewashed walls and conical stone roofs clustered in the flat, sun-drenched plain, look like something from a dream. The light in the south is harder and more direct, the colors more vivid, the silence more complete. And then there is the sea, the constant, defining presence in Italian life. Italy has over 7,000 kilometers of coastline, and the sea is not a backdrop but a protagonist. In the fishing traditions of Sicily and Sardinia, in the Venetian relationship with the lagoon, in the Genovese sailors' instinct for the horizon, in the Roman poets' longing for the Ligurian shore. The Mediterranean is warm enough for swimming from May to October, and the Italians have always understood the pleasure of the sea with the same seriousness they bring to food and wine and conversation. Italy's climate is as varied as its landscapes. The north experiences 4 distinct seasons, with cold winters in the Alps and the Po Valley and warm, humid summers on the plains. The central regions enjoy a classic Mediterranean climate, mild winters, long warm summers, the light that Raphael and Leonardo painted, the light that makes everything look slightly miraculous. The south and the islands are hotter and drier, the sun more intense, the winters brief and rarely harsh. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, Italians have always understood their landscape as something to be savored and engaged with, not simply passed through. The passeggiata, the evening walk through the town centre, is a practice that unites the landscape and the social in a single gesture. The pleasure of being outside, in the air, in the light, among one's neighbours, at the end of the working day. The piazza, the central square of every Italian town, is the landscape of social life. The church on one side, the town hall on another, the cafes along the edges, and in the centre the open space where the life of the community plays itself out. Italy's national identity is complex and deeply layered, the result of thousands of years of successive civilizations, of centuries of political fragmentation, and of a unified national history that is, in European terms, surprisingly recent. Italy only became a unified nation in 1861, and the regional identities that preceded unification, Venetian, Neapolitan, Florentine, Sicilian, remain vital and alive in ways that often surprise outsiders who expect a more homogeneous country. To be Italian is, in part, to belong to a specific region, a specific city, a specific tradition of dialect and cuisine and gesture. And yet there is also something recognizably Italian that transcends these regional distinctions. A shared aesthetic sensibility, a relationship to beauty, a way of being in the world that is unmistakably, joyfully, timelessly itself. As we gently move through time together in this documentary, we will follow this layered story with care and quiet attention. We will walk through ancient ruins and Renaissance palaces. We will taste the food and feel the warmth of a shared table. We will listen to the opera and trace the brushstrokes of the masters. We will follow the festivals and the seasons and the rhythms of a daily life that has been refined over many centuries into something very close to an art form. For now, though, simply rest here at the threshold. Imagine the first light of a spring morning in Florence, the Arno moving quietly below the Ponte Vecchio, the dome of Brunelleschi just catching the first pink of the dawn, a man on a bicycle crossing the bridge in the early silence, a cat watching from a doorway, the whole city holding its breath for a moment before the day begins. The swallows will come later, their sharp cries cutting the warm air. The bells will ring. The coffee will be made, dark and strong, in 100,000 kitchens. This is Italy, and we have only just begun. History in Italy does not announce itself, it simply is, all around you, unavoidable and magnificent. To walk through Rome is to walk through 3,000 years of continuous civilization, one layer pressed upon the next until the very ground beneath your feet is a palimpsest of empires and republics, of saints and emperors, of artists and soldiers and popes. There is almost no point in Italy where you can stand without standing on something ancient, and this deep temporal layering gives the country a quality that is difficult to describe and impossible to forget. Let us begin at the beginning, or as close to it as our knowledge allows. Long before Rome, before the Etruscans, before the Greeks, the Italian peninsula was home to peoples whose names are now barely more than whispers in the archaeological record. The Terramare culture of the Bronze Age Po Valley built their settlements on platforms above the marshland. The Villanovans of the early Iron Age are the earliest ancestors of the Etruscans, that fascinating and mysterious civilization that flourished in central Italy from roughly the 9th to the 2nd century BCE. The Etruscans are perhaps the greatest enigma of Italian antiquity. Their language, still only partially understood, was written in an alphabet borrowed from the Greeks but adapted to sounds that had no Greek equivalent. Their art, the painted tombs of Tarquinia, the bronze portraits of Cerveteri, the graceful terracotta sculptures, has a vitality and an elegiac tenderness that speaks of a culture deeply engaged with life and deeply aware of its ending. They built cities, traded across the Mediterranean, crafted objects of extraordinary beauty, and then, slowly, were absorbed into the expanding Roman world, leaving their art and their architectural knowledge and perhaps something of their temperament behind. Rome began, by tradition, in 753 BCE, though the archaeologists would push the founding somewhat earlier and make it rather less dramatic than the story of Romulus and Remus. What is certain is that the small settlement on the 7 hills of the Tiber grew, over the following centuries, into the greatest empire the Western world has ever seen. The Roman Republic, with its consuls and its senate and its complex system of laws, expanded steadily across the Italian peninsula, then across the Mediterranean, then into Gaul and Britain and the Middle East and North Africa. At its greatest extent, the Roman Empire encompassed a territory from Scotland to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara, and governed tens of millions of people under a single legal and administrative framework. Across centuries, the achievements of Roman civilization shaped the world in ways that are still fully present today. Roman law is the foundation of most modern legal systems in the Western world. Roman engineering, the roads, the aqueducts, the bridges, the concrete that still holds millennia-old structures together, represents a technical achievement that was not surpassed until the Industrial Revolution. Roman architecture, the arch, the vault, the dome, gave the world the Pantheon and the Colosseum, the triumphal arches and the basilicas that became the model for Christian churches. Roman literature gave the world Virgil and Horace, Cicero and Livy, Ovid and Tacitus. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE is one of the hinge points of world history. Not a sudden collapse but a long, gradual transformation. As the legions withdrew, the roads went unrepaired, the population declined, and the cities shrank. The period that followed, the early medieval centuries, was one of fragmentation and uncertainty, but also of quiet continuity. The Christian Church, which had been legalized under Constantine and made the official religion of the empire under Theodosius, became the institution that preserved Roman learning and administration through the long centuries of political instability. The Byzantine Empire maintained its presence in parts of Italy. Ravenna, with its extraordinary mosaics, was the Byzantine capital in the west, while in the north, waves of Germanic peoples settled and established their own kingdoms. The Lombards gave their name to the region of Lombardy. The Franks under Charlemagne controlled northern Italy in the 8th century. The papacy, based in Rome, grew in political power as well as spiritual authority, eventually claiming temporal sovereignty over a large part of central Italy. The medieval period in Italy was also, paradoxically, a period of extraordinary urban vitality. The Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, Genoa, Milan, Siena, Pisa, and many others, developed forms of self-governance and commercial enterprise that were unlike anything else in medieval Europe. Venice, built on islands in a lagoon, grew into a maritime empire of astonishing wealth and sophistication, its merchant fleets connecting the Mediterranean world to the trade routes of the East. Florence developed banking and finance to a degree of complexity that was centuries ahead of the rest of Europe. It was a Florentine bank, the Medici, that effectively controlled the finances of much of Europe at the height of its power. It was in this environment of urban wealth and civic competition that the Renaissance was born. The word means, literally, rebirth, and it describes one of the most extraordinary flowerings of human creativity in history: the rediscovery and reinterpretation of classical antiquity in art, architecture, philosophy, literature, and science. Beginning in Florence in the 14th and 15th centuries and spreading across Italy and eventually all of Europe, the Renaissance produced Dante and Petrarch and Boccaccio in literature, Giotto and Botticelli and Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael in the visual arts, Brunelleschi and Alberti and Bramante in architecture, Galileo and Leonardo in science. The names are almost too numerous, too brilliant, too generously distributed across a single small peninsula in a single century or two of time. The 16th and 17th centuries brought Italy into the orbit of the great European powers, first Spain, which controlled the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily and the Duchy of Milan, then France and Austria, whose competing ambitions made the Italian peninsula a recurring theatre of conflict. Italian culture continued to flourish under these conditions. The Baroque period produced Caravaggio and Bernini and Vivaldi and Monteverdi, but the political fragmentation of Italy meant that the peninsula was increasingly peripheral to the great decisions of European power. The Risorgimento, the movement for Italian unification, gathered force in the first half of the 19th century, animated by the ideas of nationalism and liberalism that were transforming Europe after the French Revolution. The figures of this movement: Mazzini, the philosopher of national unity; Garibaldi, the charismatic guerrilla leader whose expedition of the Thousand in 1860 conquered the kingdom of two Sicilies; and Cavour, the pragmatic diplomat of Piedmont, are the heroes of the Italian national story. Unification was achieved in 1861, though Rome itself was only incorporated in 1870, when the French garrison that had protected the Pope was withdrawn. The unified Italian state navigated the late 19th and early 20th centuries through colonial adventures in Libya and East Africa, through the First World War in which Italy fought on the Allied side and gained significant territory in the northeast, and then through the dark period of fascism under Mussolini, who came to power in 1922 and led Italy into the Second World War on the side of Germany. The liberation of Italy in 1943–45, when Allied forces advanced northward through the peninsula while Italian partisans fought against the German occupiers, was a traumatic and heroic chapter of modern Italian history. The Italian Republic, established by referendum in 1946, emerged from this difficult history with remarkable energy and creativity. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s transformed Italy from a largely agricultural country into one of the world's leading industrial economies, and the cultural explosion of the same decades, in cinema, in design, in fashion, in literature, established Italy once again as one of the great creative centers of the world. The names of this era, Fellini and Visconti in film, Olivetti in design, Valentino and Gucci in fashion, Calvino and Moravia in literature, tell a story of a culture renewing itself with remarkable speed and confidence after the devastation of war. Today, Italy carries all of these layers with a kind of comfortable pride, not the aggressive nationalism of the newly unified, but the deeper, more relaxed confidence of a culture that has been here a very long time and knows exactly who it is. In the museums and the churches, in the ruins and the piazzas, in the language and the cuisine and the way the afternoon light falls across an ancient wall, this history is not something that happened and ended. It is something that continues, quietly and magnificently, in the texture of every Italian day. Language in Italy is not merely a means of communication. It is a performance, a relationship, a music. To hear Italian spoken well, by someone who loves it, is to understand why this language has been called the most beautiful in the world, why it was chosen as the language of opera, why its words have been borrowed by musicians and lovers and chefs in every corner of the earth. The Italian language has a quality of physical pleasure in the speaking of it. The round vowels, the rolling consonants, the way the stress of each word seems to fall in exactly the right place, like a dancer landing lightly after a leap. Italian descends directly from Latin, not the formal, literary Latin of Cicero and Virgil, but the spoken Latin of the Roman legions and merchants and farmers, the vulgar Latin that evolved differently in different parts of the former empire until it became, over centuries, the distinct Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. The transition was gradual and complex, but by the time of Dante, writing in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, a recognizable literary Italian had emerged, and with Dante's Divine Comedy, it became one of the great languages of world literature in a single magnificent act. The Italian language as spoken today across the peninsula is based on the Tuscan dialect, specifically, on the dialect of Florence, which was standardized as the literary language through the influence of Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio in the 14th century and then spread gradually through the rest of the peninsula. But the story of Italian language is much richer and more complex than this single thread suggests. Italy's regional dialects are not simply accented versions of standard Italian. Many of them are distinct languages in their own right, with their own grammar and vocabulary and centuries of literary tradition. Venetian, the language of the Venetian Republic, was a major literary and commercial language of medieval and Renaissance Europe, the language in which Marco Polo dictated his travels, the language of Goldoni's comedies, a tongue whose sing-song cadences are still unmistakable in the streets of Venice today. Neapolitan, the dialect of Naples and its surrounding region, has a musical quality that has given the world some of its most beloved popular songs. O Sol Mio, Funiculi Funicular, Santa Lucia, songs whose melodies seem to carry in them the warmth of the southern sun and the blue of the Bay of Naples. Sicilian, spoken on the largest Mediterranean island, has elements of Arabic and Norman and Greek as well as Latin, a linguistic record of the island's extraordinary history of conquest and synthesis. The sound of standard Italian spoken at a conversational pace has a particular quality that is immediately recognizable and consistently pleasurable to the ear. The language has 7 pure vowels, all pronounced cleanly and completely. No murmuring, no swallowing, no trailing away. The consonants, particularly the doubled consonants that Italian uses to distinguish meanings, pala pala, casa casa, have a satisfying precision, like a key turning cleanly in a lock. And the rhythm of Italian, based on the alternation of stressed and unstressed syllables in patterns that are more regular than those of English, gives the language a musical quality that is not accidental. It is the same rhythm that underlies Italian poetry, and at its root, Italian opera. Italians are, by reputation and in reality, highly expressive communicators, and the expressiveness goes far beyond the words themselves. The Italian gestural language is perhaps the most developed and elaborate in the Western world. A repertoire of hand movements, facial expressions, shoulder shrugs, and tilts of the head that carry a full range of meaning independent of speech. The pinched fingers pointing upward mean uncertainty or a question. What are you talking about? The hand swept outward means dismissal. Forget it, it's nothing. The fingers pressed to the lips and then opened outward means something is excellent, the gesture of the food critic who has discovered paradise. These are not affectations. They are a living language, learned in childhood and used with the same fluency and precision as words. The act of greeting in Italy has its own particular warmth and ceremony. Two people who know each other well exchange kisses on both cheeks, or sometimes, in southern Italy, on both cheeks and then back to the first. The handshake between men has a firmness and directness that is itself a statement of respect. Between close friends, the embrace is genuinely warm, sustained for a moment, accompanied by inquiries about health and family that are genuinely meant and genuinely answered. There is nothing perfunctory about Italian social greeting. It is a recognition of the other person's full humanity, a brief but sincere act of attention. There are phrases in Italian that carry a weight of cultural meaning far beyond their literal translation. Bella figura, literally, beautiful figure, describes the Italian concern with making a good impression, presenting oneself well to the world, not only in dress but in manners and conversation and the management of every social situation. This is not vanity, it is closer to a form of respect, for oneself and for the others whose world one inhabits. Dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing, names a state of pleasure in pure leisure, in rest and relaxation without guilt, that is genuinely valued in Italian culture. Piano piano, slowly slowly, is the pace recommended for any task that deserves to be done well. The Italian language has given the world an extraordinary number of words that have been adopted directly into other languages, particularly in the domains of music, food, and art. Allegro, adagio, andante, forte, pianissimo. The entire vocabulary of musical notation is Italian. Pizza, pasta, risotto, gelato, espresso, cappuccino. The words we use for Italian food are the original Italian words. Piazza, palazzo, villa, studio, portfolio, scenario, the vocabulary of design and urban space. Graffiti, fresco, chiaroscuro, the vocabulary of the visual arts. The Italian language's influence on the world's culinary, musical, and artistic vocabulary is unmatched by any other tongue. Italian communication style tends toward expressiveness and emotional directness in personal relationships, while in more formal or professional contexts, a certain ceremony and indirectness is valued. The art of conversation, of agreeable, witty, engaged talking for its own pleasure, is cultivated and appreciated. The Italian concept of conversazione, of educated discussion carried on with elegance and wit, has a long tradition reaching back through the Renaissance salons and the coffee houses of the Enlightenment. A good conversation, like a good meal, should leave both parties feeling nourished. In the soft fabric of tradition, the Italian language carries within it the memory of everything that has been said and thought and felt and created in this extraordinary land over 3,000 years. When an elderly Sicilian grandmother speaks to her grandchildren in the dialect her own grandmother taught her, she is passing on something irreplaceable. When a student reads Dante for the first time and hears in those medieval verses a music that feels both ancient and astonishingly alive, she is discovering the depth of her own inheritance. When an Italian tenor steps onto a stage and opens his voice in a phrase of Cusine, he is doing what Italian language has always known how to do, turning sound into something that reaches past the mind directly to the heart. At the heart of Italian culture lies a set of values that are at once ancient and thoroughly contemporary, values shaped by thousands of years of history but worn lightly, expressed not through formal declaration but through the way life is actually lived, in the daily choices of how to eat and dress and talk and rest and love. These values resist easy summary precisely because they are so thoroughly embodied, so much a part of the texture of everyday existence that those who hold them rarely need to articulate them. They are simply how things are, how things have always been, how things should be. Perhaps the most foundational of Italian values is the appreciation of beauty, what the Italians call Illinois bello. This is not a narrowly aesthetic concern, not merely a matter of paintings and statues and architecture, though Italy's extraordinary artistic heritage certainly expresses it at the highest level. It is a broader, more democratic sensibility, a belief that beauty is not a luxury or an excess but a necessity of human life, that the world around us should be made as beautiful as human skill and care can make it, and that this making and maintaining of beauty is a legitimate and important use of human energy. This is why Italian design, of cars, furniture, clothing, domestic objects, achieves a quality that other traditions can admire but rarely match. Beauty is not an afterthought in Italy, it is part of the brief. The family remains the central institution of Italian social life, the unit around which everything else is organized and to which every Italian ultimately returns. Italian family bonds are strong and multilayered, extending beyond the nuclear family to encompass grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and the web of relationships that connects them. Major decisions, where to live, what career to pursue, who to marry, are made in consultation with the family, and the individual's well-being is understood in relation to the well-being of the whole. The Italian mamma, the mother, occupies a particular place in this family structure that is both celebrated and gently mocked from within the culture. The devoted Italian mother who cooks, cares, worries, and maintains the family's emotional center is a real figure, not merely a stereotype, and the bonds between Italian mothers and their children, particularly their sons, have a warmth and intensity that is genuinely distinctive. At the same time, Italian family structures are changing with the same forces that are changing families everywhere. Urbanization, later marriage, smaller households, the entry of women into professional life in increasing numbers. The form changes, but the underlying value, the importance of the family as the primary unit of belonging and support, remains remarkably stable. The Italian relationship with food deserves its own extended treatment, and will receive it later in this journey, but it belongs here too as an expression of values, not just of cuisine. Food in Italy is not fuel, it is culture, identity, pleasure, connection, and love. The Italian insistence on quality ingredients, traditional methods, regional specificity, and the sharing of meals with others is not mere gastronomic snobbery. It is a statement about what makes life worth living. The family that gathers around the table on a Sunday, the meal that takes 3 hours not because the food is complicated but because the conversation is good, the grandmother whose recipe for ragu has been made the same way for 60 years. These are expressions of the belief that the pleasures of daily life are sacred, that they deserve to be taken seriously and cultivated carefully. The Italian concept of faire bella figura, making a beautiful impression, operates across all social contexts and has a depth of meaning that the English phrase making a good impression barely touches. It encompasses the way one dresses, the way one speaks, the way one behaves in public spaces, the care taken in the presentation of a gift, the attention given to the setting of a table. It is not vanity or performance for its own sake. It is a form of respect for the people around you and for the shared spaces you inhabit. A town whose residents keep their streets clean and their buildings maintained and their public spaces planted with flowers is exercising faire bella figura collectively. Work is valued in Italy, but in a particular way, as something that should be done well and with pride, in a craft tradition that links quality of work to personal honor, but not as something that should consume the whole of life. The Italian concept of the artisan, the craftsperson who devotes a lifetime to mastering a single skill, carries a dignity and prestige that more industrialized cultures have largely lost. The clockmaker, the shoemaker, the tailor, the ceramicist, the cheesemaker, these are respected figures whose expertise is understood as a genuine achievement, worthy of apprenticeship and years of learning. Leisure, Illinois dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing, is understood as a genuine good in Italian culture, not as laziness or waste. The long lunch break, the afternoon rest, the evening passeggiata, the Sunday that is genuinely a day of rest and family, these are not obstacles to productivity but expressions of a philosophy that insists on the full range of human needs. A life that includes rest, beauty, good food, good conversation, and time with those you love is not an indulgent life, it is a complete one. Italian attitudes toward time have a particular quality that has been observed by visitors from more clock-regulated cultures. Time in Italy tends to be relational rather than mechanical. The meeting begins when everyone arrives, the meal ends when the conversation ends, the event starts when the mood is right. This is not disorganization, it is a different set of priorities, one that places the quality of human interaction above the strict observance of a schedule. Over generations, these values, beauty, family, food, craftsmanship, leisure, and the good conversation, have shaped a way of being in the world that is recognizably Italian, that has been admired and imitated and sought out by people from every other culture. The streams of visitors who have been coming to Italy since the days of the Grand Tour are not merely visiting museums and ruins, they are in search of something that Italian culture has cultivated with particular success, the art of living well. In Italy, the sacred does not exist in a separate realm from ordinary life. It is present in the church on every piazza, in the small shrine set into the corner of a building with a lamp that burns through the night, in the name-day celebrations that punctuate the calendar, in the blessing of the fishing fleet in spring, in the wayside crucifix at the bend of a mountain road. Italy is the country at whose center the Catholic Church has its home, and that proximity, 2,000 years of continuous religious presence, has shaped the culture in ways so deep and so pervasive that they are sometimes invisible to those who carry them. Italy was, in a very real sense, the birthplace of Western Christianity as an institutional and cultural force. The early Christian communities in Rome, in the catacombs below the city where they buried their dead and gathered for worship during the periods of persecution, were the seedbed from which the Church of Rome grew into the institution that would shape the Western world for nearly 2 millennia. The papacy, established in Rome on the tradition that Saint Peter was buried there and had been appointed by Christ as the first leader of the Church, has occupied this city without interruption for nearly 2,000 years, surviving empires, invasions, reformations, and revolutions. The Catholic liturgical calendar structures the Italian year in rhythms that are both religious and cultural. Advent and Christmas, Lent and Easter, the feasts of the saints that fall through every month of the year, these are not only religious observances but cultural events, occasions for particular foods and particular gatherings and particular forms of beauty. The Presepe, the nativity scene, has its origins in 13th century Italy, in a tradition attributed to Saint Francis of Assisi, who created the first living nativity in 1223. The elaborate Christmas markets of the north and the simple, profound presepe of Naples's workshops are both expressions of a culture that has been creating beautiful representations of the sacred for 800 years. The city of Rome itself is, in a sense, a theological statement, a city whose entire fabric has been shaped by the Church's ambition to make the eternal visible in stone. St. Peter's Basilica, the largest church in the world, rising above Bernini's magnificent colonnade in a synthesis of Michelangelo's dome and the Baroque master's genius for theatrical space, is not merely a building but a declaration that the Church of Rome claims the grandest of scales, that the sacred deserves the most magnificent of houses. But alongside this official grandeur, Rome is also a city of hundreds of smaller churches, of quiet oratories and neighborhood chapels where the daily life of faith goes on in an intimacy that the great basilicas cannot provide. The cult of the saints is deeply embedded in Italian religious and cultural life. Every Italian town has its patron saint, celebrated annually with a festival that combines religious observance with carnival, procession, fireworks, food, and communal joy. The Festa Patronale is one of the great ceremonies of Italian community life, an occasion when the town asserts its identity, its history, and its continuity through a celebration that has been performed, in essentially the same form, for hundreds of years. The Madonna, the Virgin Mary, holds a particularly central place in Italian Catholicism. The devotion to Mary that characterizes Italian religious life goes beyond formal theology into something deeper and more personal. A sense of the divine feminine as present, accessible, compassionate, capable of interceding between the human and the divine. The countless Madonnas of Italian art, from the austere Byzantine icons to Raphael's tender Madonnas to the bejeweled statues carried through the streets in southern processions, are each a different expression of this devotion, from the most formally theological to the most intimately personal. The Franciscan tradition, the movement begun by Saint Francis of Assisi in the 13th century, with its emphasis on poverty, humility, the love of nature, and the care of the poor, has left a particular mark on Italian religious culture. Francis himself is one of the most beloved figures in the history of Christianity, and his influence extends far beyond the formal religious orders that bear his name. His practice of addressing the sun and the moon and the birds and the fish as brothers and sisters, of finding the sacred in the most ordinary of creatures and moments, resonates with something deep in the Italian character. The The same sensibility that produces the careful attention to natural beauty, the tenderness for small things, the sense that the world is full of significance and deserves to be looked at closely. Alongside official Catholicism, Italy has a rich tradition of popular religiosity, the kind of belief that lives in domestic shrines and neighborhood chapels, in the prayers whispered before a journey and the candles lit for the sick and the dead, in the superstitions about the evil eye and the lucky number and the auspicious moment. The corno rosso, the red horn amulet worn to ward off the evil eye, hangs in Italian cars and kitchens alongside images of the Madonna. The woman who prays the rosary every evening may also knock on wood 3 times and spit to ward off bad luck. These are not contradictions. They are the layers of a spiritual life that has accumulated over many centuries, incorporating the pre-Christian as well as the Christian, the official as well as the folk. The physical spaces of Italian religious architecture have a quality that is unlike almost anything else in the world, the result of 2,000 years of continuous artistic investment in the decoration and embellishment of sacred spaces. To enter the Cathedral of Florence and look up at Vasari's frescoes in Brunelleschi's dome is to enter a space of almost vertiginous spiritual ambition. To sit in the quiet Baroque church of San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome and look at Caravaggio's 3 paintings of St. Matthew, painted with a darkness and immediacy that made contemporaries gasp, is to encounter art that is simultaneously a theological statement and a profoundly human one. For many Italians, the relationship with religion is one of cultural as much as strictly theological identity. Even Italians who do not consider themselves practicing Catholics may attend Mass at Christmas and Easter, have their children baptized, observe the feast days of their patron saints, and feel a genuine, if complex, connection to the Church and its traditions. The Church is woven into the fabric of Italian culture in ways that cannot be unpicked without doing violence to the fabric itself. It is present in the architecture and the art, in the language and the calendar, in the sense of community that gathers around the parish even among those who rarely enter it for formal worship. As night falls over an Italian town and the lights come on in the churches and the little street shrines glow with their persistent flames, there is a sense, difficult to explain but easy to feel, of something very old and very patient continuing, without urgency or drama, in the quiet dark. This is the sacred as Italy has always understood it. Not an interruption of ordinary life but its deepest dimension, present in beauty and in love and in the care given to the simplest of daily acts. In the soft fabric of tradition, Italy's customs carry an extraordinary weight of beauty and continuity. From the spectacular pageantry of Venice's Carnival to the solemn processions of Holy Week in Sicilian towns, from the harvest festivals of autumn to the quiet ceremony of the Sunday meal, Italian tradition is not a museum piece to be observed from a respectful distance. It is a living practice, contested and celebrated, adapted and renewed with each generation. Carnival, the period of festivity before the austerity of Lent, is celebrated throughout Italy with particular extravagance in Venice, where the tradition of masquerade and costume has its roots in the Carnival of the medieval Republic. For 2 weeks before Ash Wednesday, Venice becomes a theatre of extraordinary beauty and strangeness. The narrow calle fill with masked figures in the elaborate costumes of the Serenissima, the Borta, the Volto, the Moretta, their identities concealed beneath masks of white plaster and black fabric, moving through the morning mist and the evening candlelight with a dignity that seems to belong to another century. The mask, the maschera, was central to Venetian social life for centuries, allowing the noble and the commoner, the man and the woman, to move through the city on equal terms, concealed and free. The Italian wedding is a ceremony of elaborate celebration that varies considerably by region but everywhere shares a commitment to abundance, beauty, and the gathering of the entire extended family. A traditional Italian wedding feast is not a matter of hours but of the better part of a day, multiple courses arriving at a pace that allows for conversation and digestion and the gradual accumulation of warmth and pleasure. The confetti, sugar-coated almonds in white, are the universal symbol of Italian wedding celebration, given to guests as bomboniere, small gifts that mark the occasion with sweetness. In the South, the wedding celebrations may continue for 2 days, with music and dancing and the continuous hospitality of a culture that understands the feast as a form of love made visible. The Palio di Siena is perhaps the most dramatic of Italy's traditional celebrations, a bareback horse race that has been run in the central piazza of Siena twice a year, on the 2nd of July and the 16th of August, since the medieval period. The Palio is not merely a sporting event, it is the expression of a fierce civic identity, an annual drama in which the city's 17 contrade, the ancient neighborhood divisions, compete for a silk banner that is worth more than any trophy could be, because it represents the honor of the contrada and the affection of its patron saint. The preparations for the Palio, the trial runs, the drawing of lots, the elaborate procession in medieval costume, last for days. The race itself lasts barely a minute. And the emotions it generates, the joy of the winning contrada, the grief of the others, the prayer offered in the church of the patron saint, are entirely real, entirely ancient, entirely Italian. Easter in Italy is celebrated with a solemnity and a sensory richness that reflects the country's deep Catholic roots. The Holy Week processions in towns throughout the south and Sicily are among the most moving ceremonies in the Christian world. The silent processions through candlelit streets, the penitents in white robes and pointed hoods carrying statues of the sorrowful Madonna and the dead Christ through the darkness of Holy Thursday and Good Friday, the town following in silence behind. And then, after this darkness, the joy of Easter Sunday, the church bells ringing, the families gathering for the pranzo pasquale, the lamb and the artichokes and the columba, the dove-shaped cake that is the Easter counterpart of the Christmas panettone. Ferragosto, the 15th of August, the feast of the Assumption of Mary, is the great summer holiday of Italy, when the entire country seems to close and head for the sea or the mountains. In the cities, the streets empty. In the beach resorts and the mountain villages, the population expands. The tradition has ancient roots. The Roman Emperor Augustus established a period of rest and celebration in mid-August that was later absorbed into the Christian calendar, and it has a particular quality of collective release, of an entire nation simultaneously deciding that it is time to rest. The vendemmia, the grape harvest, is an autumn ceremony in the wine-producing regions that combines hard work with celebration in the characteristically Italian way. In the vineyards of Tuscany and Piedmont and Veneto and Sicily, the harvest brings the community together in a shared labor that has something of the sacred about it. The care given to the grapes, the knowledge required to determine the perfect moment of picking, the communal meals eaten in the vineyard at the end of the working day. The enoteca, the wine bar, where the new wine is eventually served, is as much a social institution as a commercial one, a place where the year's work is tasted and discussed with the seriousness it deserves. The Italian Christmas tradition is rich with regional variation. In Naples, the Christmas period begins on the 8th of December with the Feast of the Immaculate Conception and the illumination of the city's famous Christmas lights. The nativity figures, the figurines for the presepe, are sold in the Spaccanapoli street that bisects the historic center, where craftsmen have been making these figures for centuries, adding to the traditional cast of characters, the shepherds, the magi, the angel, contemporary figures from politics and sport and popular culture that give the ancient scene a distinctly Neapolitan irreverence. Funeral customs in Italy are handled with a seriousness and a communal warmth that reflects the culture's deep attachment to family and to the continuity of memory. The funerary mass, with its flowers and its candles and the prayers offered for the soul of the departed, is an occasion for the entire community to gather. The anniversary of a death is marked, the graves attended with care. The family visits the cemetery on the Feast of All Saints on the 1st of November, when the entire country comes together to honor its dead with flowers and prayers and the steady flame of the candles that burn through the autumn night. These customs and traditions, the Palio and the Carnival, the wedding and the harvest, the Christmas and the Easter and the great summer holiday, are the visible rhythms of a culture that has been celebrating life with extraordinary imagination and energy for as long as anyone can remember. They are how Italy tells itself its own story, year after year, in forms that are ancient and alive. Italian food is, quite simply, one of the great achievements of human civilization. This is not hyperbole. It is the considered judgment of anyone who has ever eaten a plate of pasta made by someone who learned from their mother who learned from her mother, or tasted a risotto that has been tended with the patience and attention it requires, or broken open a ripe tomato in August in a Campanian garden and eaten it still warm from the sun with nothing but good oil and a little salt. Italian cuisine is the result of thousands of years of cultivation and refinement, of a culture that has always understood eating as one of the fundamental pleasures and therefore one of the fundamental responsibilities of human life. The first principle of Italian cooking is the quality of the ingredients. Italian cuisine does not disguise its materials with complex sauces or elaborate techniques. It honors them. A bruschetta is a piece of good bread grilled over fire, rubbed with garlic, and dressed with the best olive oil available, and it is extraordinary because the bread is made from good flour, the garlic is fresh, and the oil is pressed from ripe olives at the right moment. A caprese salad, sliced tomatoes with fresh mozzarella and basil and oil, is nothing more than those four things, and it is perfect when each of those four things is perfect. The philosophy is radical in its simplicity. Find the best possible version of each ingredient, treat it with care and respect, and the cooking almost takes care of itself. The second principle is regional identity. Italian cuisine is not a single national cuisine but a mosaic of regional and local traditions, each shaped by geography and climate and history and the particular genius of its people. The rich, buttery cuisine of Emilia-Romagna, the region that gives the world Parmigiano Reggiano and Prosciutto di Parma and Mortadella and Tagliatelle al Ragu, is as different from the sparse, elemental cooking of Sardinia, with its roasted suckling pig and its flatbread and its sharp sheep's cheese, as two cuisines from different continents could be. The Roman love of offal and cacio e pepe, the Sicilian Baroque combination of sweet and savory in dishes like pasta con lassade, the Ligurian perfume of pesto made from the small, tender basil that grows in the hillside gardens above Genoa, these are distinct traditions, each complete in itself. Pasta is perhaps the ingredient most associated with Italy in the world's imagination, and the pasta tradition is indeed extraordinary in its variety and depth. There are hundreds of distinct pasta shapes in the Italian repertoire. Each region, each town, sometimes each valley has its own, and the shapes are not arbitrary. They are designed to capture and hold different sauces in different ways. The flat sheets of lasagna hold a rich, layered filling. The ridges of rigatoni grip a chunky meat sauce. The hollow of a tortellino contains its filling of pork and mortadella and parmesan. The thin strands of spaghetti cling to a light, oil-based sauce without becoming heavy. The pasta is the architecture of the dish, and its form is as considered as the form of a building. The risotto of the Po Valley is another of the Italian culinary arts that requires patience and attention. The constant stirring, the gradual addition of warm stock, the monitoring of the grain's progress from firm to tender without ever allowing it to become soft, the final addition of butter and parmesan that transforms the risotto from a grain dish into something of extraordinary richness and smoothness. A perfect risotto, Milanese with its golden saffron, or alla parmigiana, or with porcini mushrooms gathered from the autumn forests, is a meditation as much as a meal. The slow food movement, born in Italy in 1989 as a protest against the opening of a McDonald's near the Spanish Steps in Rome, has its roots in values that have always been Italian. The insistence on quality, on locality, on the connection between food and place, on the meal as a social and cultural act rather than a refueling stop. The movement's name was chosen deliberately in opposition to fast food, but the values it represents are not new. They are a formal articulation of what Italian grandmothers have always known, that good food takes time, that good food comes from good places, and that good food eaten with people you love is one of the great pleasures of a human life. Coffee in Italy is not merely a beverage, it is a ritual, a social institution, and a matter of national pride. The espresso, made properly, is a small, intense, dark drink consumed standing at the bar in a matter of minutes. Not a leisurely experience but an efficient one, a moment of concentrated pleasure in the middle of the working day. The art of the barista, the person who pulls the espresso, who steams the milk to the exact right temperature, who draws the pattern in the foam of a cappuccino, is a craft taken seriously, and the judgments made about the quality of a cafe's espresso are made with the same critical attention given to fine wine. The olive oil of Italy is another of the country's great gifts to the world's table. The olives cultivated across the Italian peninsula, from the Ligurian coast to the plains of Apulia, produce oils of extraordinary variety and quality. The grassy, peppery oils of Tuscany, the mild, golden oils of Liguria, the intense, fruity oils of Sicily and Calabria. Good Italian olive oil, used generously and without apology on everything from bread to pasta to salad to grilled fish, is not a luxury. It is a daily pleasure, and its quality is maintained by the same combination of careful cultivation and artisanal production that characterizes Italian food culture at its best. The Italian meal is a social event first and a culinary one second, or perhaps it is impossible to separate the two, since the social pleasure of eating together is itself a form of nourishment. The long Sunday lunch, the restaurant table that is understood to be yours for the evening and not to be cleared until you are ready to leave, the antipasto that sets a mood of relaxed abundance before the serious eating begins. These are not inefficiencies but values, expressions of the belief that the time given to eating together is among the best spent time in human life. Gelato, Italian ice cream, deserves its own moment of pure appreciation. Made with fresh milk and eggs and the best possible fruit and nuts and chocolate, turned slowly by machines that keep it at a softer, warmer temperature than industrial ice cream, served in cones or cups with a wooden paddle, eaten standing in the piazza in the summer evening. Gelato is Italian culture condensed into a single small pleasure, the best possible version of a simple thing, made with care and consumed with joy. Every society has its unwritten codes of behavior, the invisible rules that govern how people treat each other in public and private, how respect is shown and received, how conflict is managed, how the individual and the collective are balanced. In Italy, these codes have been shaped by thousands of years of urban civilization, by the Catholic tradition's insistence on communal life and charity, by the Renaissance values of grace and courtesy, and by the Mediterranean temperament that places warmth and sociability among the highest of human virtues. The Italian concept of educazione, education in the broadest sense, encompassing manners and social refinement as well as formal learning, is central to the social fabric. To be ben educato, well-educated, is to be well-mannered, considerate, capable of making others feel comfortable in your presence. Parents invest considerable energy in teaching their children the forms of social behavior. How to greet adults, how to behave at table, how to receive gifts, how to be a guest in someone else's home. These are not trivial matters. They are understood as part of the formation of a person's character and the condition of their success in social life. The bella figura principle already discussed in the context of values operates throughout Italian social life as a form of collective self-presentation. The care with which Italians dress for every occasion, even a quick trip to the market, even a casual evening at a friend's house, reflects a belief that how one presents oneself is a form of respect for the people one encounters. The Italian shoe, the Italian suit, the Italian bag, these are not merely consumer goods but signals, contributions to the collective aesthetic of the street and the piazza. The elderly gentleman in a beautifully cut jacket who stops to feed the pigeons in the piazza is exercising bella figura as much as the model on the Milanese catwalk. Hospitality in Italy is offered with a directness and a sincerity that can catch visitors from more reserved cultures off guard. To be invited into an Italian home is to be welcomed with a generosity that expects nothing in return except your enjoyment. The table set beautifully, the food prepared with care, the wine chosen thoughtfully, and the conversation conducted with genuine interest in your life and opinions. The Italian host who insists on feeding you even when you have just eaten, who refills your glass before it is empty, who will not hear of you leaving before the fruit and the coffee and perhaps a little grappa. This is not performance, it is the natural expression of a culture in which the well-being of guests is a genuine priority. Public behavior in Italy varies considerably between north and south and between urban and rural contexts, but certain patterns are consistent throughout. The piazza is the great democratic social space, a place where all ages and social classes gather, where the passeggiator of the evening brings the whole town out to see and be seen, where children run and old men play cards and teenagers cluster on the steps of the fountain. The piazza is not merely an urban feature. It is the physical expression of an Italian understanding of community as something that requires a shared, beautiful, public space in which to maintain itself. The Italian relationship with time, already touched upon, has social implications that are worth dwelling on. The concept of l'ora italiana, Italian time, refers to the cultural norm that social events begin when people arrive rather than at the precise moment stated in the invitation. This is not rudeness or disorganization. It is a reflection of the priority given to the quality of social interaction over the strict management of time. When the conversation is going well, it continues. When the meal is good, it lingers. When a friend is in trouble, the schedule adjusts. The generations in Italian social life are more integrated than in many Northern European or North American contexts. The multi-generational meal, where grandparents and grandchildren and everyone in between eat together at the same table, is not an occasional exception but a regular occurrence. The elderly are not hidden from public view but present in the streets and the piazzas, walking with their friends in the evening, sitting outside the cafe in the afternoon, watching their grandchildren play in the public gardens. This integration of the generations is not only a social practice but a form of mutual care. The young learn from the old, and the old are sustained by the energy and affection of the young. The Italian attitude towards civic space, the streets and piazzas and public buildings of the town, reflects the same values of beauty and care that animate private life. The Italians who sweep the pavement in front of their shop every morning, who tend the window boxes of geraniums above the street, who maintain the public fountain, are exercising the same principle of bella figura on behalf of the community. The beauty of Italian towns, the reason that visitors come from everywhere in the world to walk through them, is not accidental. It is the result of centuries of collective care, of the belief that the public space is a shared home and deserves the same attention as a private one. The Italian passion for football, Illinois Calcio, is one of the great expressions of Italian social identity, a weekly ritual that unites and divides communities with an intensity that is almost religious. The stadium is the secular church of the Italian weekend, the place where the town's identity is performed and contested, where loyalty and passion are displayed without apology, where the result of 90 minutes of play can affect the mood of an entire city for the week that follows. The tifoso, the fan, is a social type in Italy, defined by his loyalty to a specific club, his knowledge of the game's history and statistics, his willingness to travel across the country to support his team, and his capacity for both great joy and great suffering. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, the social norms of Italy represent the accumulated wisdom of a culture that has been living together in dense urban environments for a very long time, and has developed sophisticated strategies for doing so with grace and warmth. They are not a formal code but a living practice, transmitted through example and imitation, through the daily experience of growing up in a culture that takes the quality of social life seriously. Imagine walking through the streets of Milan on an autumn morning, when the fashion season is at its peak and the city seems more than ever like an extended runway. The people you pass are dressed with a care and a confidence that is immediately striking, not uniformly fashionable in a trend-following sense, but individually put together, each outfit a considered statement, each detail a deliberate choice. The cut of the coat, the choice of shoe, the way the scarf is tied, these are not accidents but expressions of a culture that has always understood clothing as a form of self-presentation and self-respect. Italy is the fashion capital of the world, a claim that can be disputed. Paris will offer its own candidacy, but that has solid grounds. The Italian fashion industry, centered in Milan, with important contributions from Florence, Rome, and Naples, produces garments and accessories of a quality and a beauty that are unmatched anywhere. The names are part of the global vocabulary: Gucci, Prada, Armani, Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Valentino, Fendi, Missoni, Ferragamo, each a distinct aesthetic vision, each rooted in Italian craft traditions and Italian sensibility. But Italian fashion is not only the high end of the industry, it is also the everyday practice of a culture that takes dressing seriously at every level. The Italian man in his perfectly pressed trousers and his well-shined shoes and his carefully chosen tie is not necessarily wealthy. He is exercising a cultural value, maintaining a standard that his father and grandfather maintained before him. The Italian woman of a certain age who wears her silk scarf with the casual elegance of someone who has been tying scarves for 50 years is not making a fashion statement. She is being herself, the self that her culture has helped her become. The craft traditions that underlie Italian fashion are ancient and still living. The tailoring of Naples, the Neapolitan sartoria, is considered by many connoisseurs to be the finest in the world, producing suits of extraordinary lightness and precision that are made entirely by hand in small workshops where the cutting and sewing techniques have been refined over many generations. The shoemakers of Florence and Rome and Vigevano craft shoes whose quality is apparent in the hand before they are even tried on. The weight of the leather, the precision of the stitching, the suppleness of the sole. The silk weavers of Como produce fabric that has clothed the world's great fashion houses for more than a century. Italian leather goods, shoes, bags, belts, gloves, represent another great tradition of craftsmanship. Florence was the center of the leather trade in the Renaissance, and the city's leather workshops are still concentrated in the streets of the Oltrarno neighborhood, where the smell of tanned hide mingles with the sound of hammers and the glimpse through open doorways of craftsmen bent over their benches. A Florentine leather bag, made in the traditional way from the finest Tuscan calfskin, is an object designed to last for decades and to become more beautiful with use, the opposite of the disposable consumer goods that surround it in the global marketplace. The Italian relationship between clothing and occasion is carefully calibrated. Certain situations demand certain dress, the Sunday Mass, the formal dinner, the civic ceremony, and showing up in the wrong clothes is a social error of the kind that the bella figura principle makes unthinkable. But Italian dressing is not rigidly formal, it is flexible and nuanced, capable of moving between formal and casual with an ease that reflects genuine confidence. The Italian businessman who loosens his tie at the end of the day without abandoning his overall elegance, the Italian woman who pairs a beautifully tailored jacket with jeans without losing her dignity. These transitions are executed with a naturalness that comes from genuinely understanding what clothes are for. The traditional clothing of Italy's various regions is a subject of extraordinary richness, a visual map of the country's extraordinary cultural diversity. The embroidered costumes of the Alpine valleys, with their Tyrolean influences and their precise regional variations, are as different from the elaborate Baroque embroidery of Sicilian traditional dress as the landscapes they come from. The bright colors and geometric patterns of Sardinian traditional costume reflect the island's distinct cultural heritage, while the sober elegance of Piedmontese traditional dress speaks of a different kind of refinement. These costumes are worn today mainly at festivals and folk events, but they remain a living part of the culture, maintained by the same sense of local pride and identity that animates the Palio of Siena and the Carnival of Venice. Italian jewelry is another form of wearable art with a long and distinguished tradition. The goldsmiths of Florence and Rome and Naples have been practicing their craft since the Renaissance, producing objects of extraordinary beauty from gold and silver and precious stones. The coral jewelry of Torre del Greco, near Naples, is a tradition specific to that town. The coral fished from the Mediterranean and worked into necklaces and brooches and figurines that have been sought by collectors around the world for centuries. The cameo workshops of Torre del Greco, carving tiny scenes in high relief on shells and coral and hardstone, continue a tradition that was already ancient when the Romans collected Greek cameos. In the soft fabric of tradition, Italian clothing and appearance reflect the same values that animate every other aspect of the culture. The belief in beauty as a necessity, the respect for craftsmanship, the attention to quality of material and detail of execution, the understanding that how one presents oneself is a form of care for the world one inhabits. To dress well in Italy is not vanity, it is culture. It is the daily practice of a people who have always known that the visible surface of things carries meaning, and that meaning deserves to be expressed with care. In Italian culture, art is not an activity that exists separately from the rest of life. It is the medium through which the culture has always expressed its deepest values, its greatest aspirations, its most intimate relationship with beauty and truth. To speak of Italian art is to speak of what is perhaps the most concentrated and sustained achievement of human creativity in the Western world. From the frescoes of Giotto to the ceilings of Michelangelo, from the architecture of Brunelleschi to the films of Fellini, from the operas of Verdi to the design of the Olivetti typewriter. Italy has given the world more of its defining artistic experiences than any other country, and the flow shows no sign of diminishing. The Renaissance, That extraordinary flowering of art and learning that began in Florence in the 14th century and spread across Italy and then the world, is the achievement with which Italy is most associated, and rightly so. The Renaissance was not merely a period of great art. It was a transformation in the way human beings understood themselves and their relationship to the world around them. The artists of the Renaissance, Giotto, Masaccio, Botticelli, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian, Tintoretto, were not merely producing beautiful objects. They were working out new ways of seeing, new approaches to space and light and the human figure, new ideas about the relationship between the sacred and the human. Leonardo da Vinci, born in a small Tuscan town in 1452, died in France in 1519, is perhaps the most astonishing single human being in the history of Western civilization. Painter, sculptor, architect, scientist, engineer, anatomist, musician, philosopher, writer. His notebooks, filled with drawings and observations and speculations that range from the anatomy of the human heart to the mechanics of flight, reveal a mind of terrifying scope and precision. His paintings, The Last Supper in Milan, the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, the Virgin of the Rocks, have been looked at so often and reproduced so many times that it is difficult to see them fresh, but they repay the effort. Their technical achievement and their psychological depth are still, 5 centuries later, not fully explained. Michelangelo Buonarroti, born in Tuscany in 1475, died in Rome in 1564, worked in marble and fresco and architecture with a power and a grandeur that still seem almost superhuman. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted lying on scaffolding over 4 years, is a statement about human creativity and human aspiration that has never been surpassed. The David in Florence, carved from a single enormous block of white marble, is one of those rare works of art in which the physical material seems to have been made to transcend its own limitations. The cold stone seeming to breathe, the stone muscle seeming about to flex. The Pietà in St. Peter's, made when Michelangelo was in his early 20s, has a tenderness and a grief that still stop visitors in their tracks. The music of Italy, and particularly Italian opera, has shaped the musical culture of the entire Western world. Opera was invented in Italy, in Florence, around 1600, as an attempt to recreate the drama of ancient Greece. What began as an antiquarian experiment became one of the greatest art forms in history, producing over the following 3 centuries works of Monteverdi and Handel, of Rossini and Donizetti and Bellini, of Verdi and Puccini, that remain the core of the operatic repertoire today. Giuseppe Verdi, born in a village in Emilia-Romagna in 1813, died in Milan in 1901, is perhaps the greatest of Italian composers, and one of the greatest opera composers of any nationality. His works, Rigoletto, La Traviata, Otello, Falstaff, Aida, and many others, combine musical genius of the highest order with a dramatic intelligence and a feeling for the human voice that make them inexhaustibly moving. Verdi was not only a musician but a national symbol. His name was used during the Risorgimento as an acronym for Vittorio Emanuele Re d'Italia, and his music carried the emotional force of the movement for national unity. Giacomo Puccini, born in Lucca in 1858, died in Brussels in 1924, is the composer whose works most fully inhabit the Italian opera tradition at its most lush and emotionally direct. La Bohème, Tosca, Madame Butterfly, Turandot. These are operas of overwhelming romantic power, their melodies capable of moving listeners to tears even in recordings, even through speakers, even in translation. To hear Nessun Dorma performed by a great tenor in a great theatre, with the full weight of an orchestra behind it, is to understand what opera at its best can do: give physical form, in sound, to emotions too large for ordinary speech. Italian cinema is another great artistic achievement of the modern era. The neo-realism of the post-war period, films by Rossellini, De Sica, and Visconti that face the reality of wartime destruction and social suffering with a directness and a humanity that transformed the art form, is one of the great movements in cinema history. And then the extraordinary careers of Federico Fellini, Michelangelo Antonioni, Pierpaolo Pasolini, and Bernardo Bertolucci in the 1960s and 1970s produced a body of work that placed Italian cinema at the absolute center of the world's cinematic conversation. Fellini's 8½, Antonioni's L'Avventura, Pasolini's The Gospel According to Matthew, Bertolucci's The Conformist. These are films that changed the way cinema understood itself. Italian design, industrial design, graphic design, interior design, is another form of Italian creative genius that has shaped the modern world. The designers who emerged from the Italian schools in the mid-20th century, Gio Ponti, Ettore Sottsass, Marco Zanuzzo, Achille Castiglione, understood design as an art form with the same seriousness that painters brought to painting, and the objects they produced, furniture, lamps, typewriters, automobiles, are works of art that happen to function extraordinarily well. The Italian approach to design, the belief that everyday objects deserve to be made as beautiful as possible, that function and beauty are not in tension but reinforce each other, has influenced design practice everywhere in the world. Literature in Italy has a continuous history from Dante to the present day that is unmatched in its density and quality. Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in the early 14th century, is not only the foundation of the Italian literary language but one of the greatest works of literature in any language, a journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise that encompasses the whole of medieval knowledge and belief while remaining deeply personal and almost unbearably moving. Petrarca's sonnets, Boccaccio's Decameron, Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered. The Italian literary tradition of the Renaissance is one of the richest in the world. And in the modern era, novelists and poets of the stature of Italo Calvino, Primo Levi, Elena Ferrante, and Umberto Eco have maintained Italy's place at the forefront of world literature. In the soft fabric of tradition, creativity in Italy is not the preserve of a specialized class of artists and intellectuals. It is a cultural disposition, a way of engaging with the world that infuses everything from the great cathedral to the local baker's arrangement of his morning pastries. The same care, the same eye, the same insistence that things should be beautiful as well as functional. This runs through Italian culture at every level, and it is one of the things that makes Italy, despite its many complications and contradictions, one of the most life-giving places in the world. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, the systems that organize a society, its laws, its institutions, its schools and hospitals and courts and civic structures, shape experience in ways that are often invisible until you try to understand why things are the way they are. In Italy, these systems have been shaped by the extraordinary depth of the country's history, by the particular circumstances of late unification, by the Catholic social tradition, and by the energy and creativity with which the post-war Italian Republic rebuilt itself from the ruins of fascism. Italy is a parliamentary republic, established by the Constitution of 1948, a document that reflects the determination of the men and women who wrote it to prevent the return of authoritarian government. The Italian constitutional system provides for a bicameral parliament, the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate, and a government drawn from the parliamentary majority, with a President of the Republic who serves as head of state in a largely ceremonial role. The constitutional framework is one of the strongest in Europe in its protection of individual rights and civil liberties, a direct response to the fascist period. Italian political life is famous for its complexity and, at times, its instability. Italy has had more governments than almost any other major democracy since the war, a reflection of the fragmented political landscape and the difficulty of forming stable parliamentary majorities. And yet this apparent instability coexists with a remarkable continuity at the level of the state administration and the social fabric. The schools continue to function, the hospitals continue to care for patients, the trains continue to run, more or less, whatever government happens to be in office. The Italian capacity for maintaining the substance of civil life, even in the absence of political stability, is a form of collective resilience that deserves respect. The Italian legal system is based on Roman law, which is itself the foundation of most legal systems in the Western world. Civil law, criminal law, administrative law, family law, all are codified in detailed legislation that reflects centuries of legal scholarship and practice. The Italian court system is complex and, by international standards, slow. The length of court proceedings is a chronic problem in the Italian legal system, and reforming it is a perennial ambition of successive governments. But the fundamental protections of the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, the right to a fair trial, the independence of the judiciary, are firmly embedded in the constitutional fabric. Education in Italy has a long and distinguished history rooted in the tradition of the universities. Bologna, founded in 1088 and considered the world's oldest university, is Italian, and the university tradition has been central to Italian intellectual and civic life ever since. The Italian public school system provides free education from early childhood through secondary school, and the quality of public education, particularly at the secondary level, with its emphasis on history, literature, philosophy, and the classical languages, is generally high. The Lyceum tradition, which includes the classical Lyceum with its study of Latin and Greek alongside modern languages and sciences, produces graduates of considerable breadth and rigor. The Italian healthcare system, the Servizio Sanitario Nazionale, provides universal healthcare to all Italian citizens and residents, funded through general taxation and delivering services that are, particularly in the north and center of the country, of high quality. The system is not without its difficulties. Regional disparities between north and south are significant, and the system operates under chronic funding pressure. But the commitment to universal healthcare as a right rather than a privilege is deeply embedded in the Italian constitutional tradition and in Italian social values. The Italian economy is the third largest in the Eurozone and the eighth largest in the world, a remarkable achievement for a country that was still predominantly agricultural in the first half of the 20th century. Italian economic strength is concentrated in the industrial triangle of the north, Milan, Turin, Genoa, and in the network of small and medium enterprises that has given Italy a distinctive economic model. Flexible, innovative, design-driven, capable of producing goods of exceptional quality in very specific niches. The Italian fashion and luxury goods industry, one of the great contributors to Italy's export success, is built on exactly this model. Small and medium enterprises, many of them family-owned, each specializing in a specific product or technique, combining craftsmanship with design intelligence to produce goods that command premium prices in global markets. The same model is found in mechanical engineering, ceramics, food and wine, furniture and interior design. Industries where Italian companies have achieved and maintained world-leading positions through the combination of craftsmanship, design, and the particular quality of attention that Italian culture brings to the making of things. Social welfare in Italy operates through a combination of state provision and the family solidarity already discussed. The state provides pensions, unemployment benefits, healthcare, and education. The family provides what the state does not: informal care for the elderly and the sick, financial support for young people starting careers, the emotional and practical infrastructure of daily life. This dual system, where state and family complement each other, has proven remarkably resilient, though it also places particular burdens on Italian women, who are disproportionately responsible for the informal care work that sustains the family's welfare functions. The Italian relationship with the environment reflects the country's extraordinary natural and cultural landscape heritage. Italy has more UNESCO World Heritage Sites than any other country in the world, a reflection of the extraordinary density of cultural and natural heritage in this compact and varied peninsula. The management of this heritage, its conservation, its presentation to the millions of visitors who come to experience it, its protection from the pressures of development and climate change, is one of the great civic challenges of modern Italy. The organizations and professionals who dedicate their working lives to this task are exercising a form of citizenship that is among the most important in the country. Over generations, Italy's social and legal systems have evolved through periods of extraordinary difficulty and achieved, in the post-war republic, a framework of democratic governance and social provision that supports a good life for the vast majority of its citizens. The challenges that remain, economic inequality between North and South, the need for judicial reform, the pressures of demographic change, are real and serious. But they are challenges that a rich, deeply rooted, creatively resourceful culture is working on, with the same patience and ingenuity that it brings to everything else. As night settles over the landscape, over the red rooftops of Florence and the quiet canals of Venice, over the ancient stones of Rome and the silver sea off the Amalfi coast, the spirit of Italy continues to breathe quietly through its people, its stories, and its timeless traditions. We have walked a long way together in this journey, through history and language, through religion and food, through art and law and the soft fabric of daily custom. We have followed the light as it moved across the Tuscan hills, from the pale gold of dawn to the deep amber of evening. We have sat at tables laden with pasta and risotto and gelato and the best wine that a generous earth has produced. We have moved through the corridors of museums that contain more beauty than any single lifetime can absorb. We have listened to the bells of 100 churches, the aria of 100 operas, the laughter of children in the piazza of 1,000 Italian towns. What endures in all of this? What connects the Roman legionary who marched through Britain to the Milanese designer who is changing how the world looks, the Sicilian grandmother who makes her Sunday ragu the same way her grandmother made it to the Venetian gondolier who knows the lagoon's channels as well as he knows his own name, is something that cannot be easily summarized but can be felt, a relationship with beauty and history that is unlike any other, a capacity for the full range of human pleasure and human sorrow, a way of being present in the world that is warm and engaged and intensely, joyfully alive. Italy is, above all else, a country that knows how to live. Not in the sense of mere survival or comfort, but in the deeper sense, the art of living, the bella vita, the beautiful life. This does not mean that Italian life is without difficulty or darkness. It has known both in abundance. It means that the culture has, over long centuries of practice and refinement, developed a way of finding beauty and pleasure and meaning in the ordinary texture of daily existence. In the morning coffee, in the evening walk, in the Sunday meal, in the sound of the church bells, in the particular quality of the afternoon light on an ancient wall. Italy knows how to remember. The Colosseum and the Pantheon, the Uffizi and the Vatican museums, the Baroque churches and the Renaissance palaces, these are not dead monuments but living presences, still instructing and inspiring and moving everyone who stands before them. The craftsmen who continue the medieval traditions of their trades in the workshops of Florence and Naples are not practicing nostalgia. They are maintaining a living connection to something irreplaceable, the knowledge of how to make beautiful things by hand. The farmers who tend the ancient olive groves and vineyards of the peninsula are not being romantic about agriculture. They are producing, with care and knowledge accumulated over generations, some of the world's greatest food and wine. Italy knows how to be present. The passeggiata, the evening walk through the town, is not merely exercise. It is the daily practice of being visible and visible to others, of taking one's place in the community's life, of attending to the specific beauty of the specific place on the specific evening. The Italian meal that takes 3 hours is not slow because the food is complicated. It is long because the conversation is good, because the pleasure of eating together is worth more than the time it costs. The siesta, the afternoon rest, is not laziness. It is the acknowledgement that the body and the mind need rest, and that rest is not an interruption of life but part of its fullness. The landscapes of Italy, the mountains and the sea, the plains and the hills, the ancient cities and the remote valleys, are themselves an argument for a certain way of living. A land of such extraordinary beauty demands a culture capable of responding to it with equal intensity. The Italians' relationship with their landscape, the love of place, the attachment to the specific town and region and terroir that makes the wine of this valley different from the wine of the next valley, the cheese of this mountain different from the cheese of the mountain across the pass, is not parochialism but a form of deep attention. It is the insistence that the particular, the local, the specific is where life is actually lived, and that it deserves to be known and loved in its particularity. Over generations, the people of Italy have demonstrated a resilience that is all the more remarkable for being so quiet, so little expressed in the language of heroism and so much expressed in the language of continuity. The culture that survived the fall of Rome and the long centuries of medieval fragmentation, that survived the Black Death and the sack of Rome, that survived the wars and the fascism of the 20th century and rebuilt itself so brilliantly in the post-war decades, this is a culture of extraordinary vitality and depth. Its resilience is not the resilience of those who are unaffected by difficulty. It is the resilience of those who know how to find joy in life even when life is hard, who understand that the proper response to suffering is not the suppression of pleasure but its fuller cultivation. As you rest now, allow the images and sounds and smells of this long journey to settle gently in your mind. The light on the dome of Florence at dawn. The sound of a Cusine aria drifting from an open window on a warm evening. The taste of a ripe August tomato, still warm from the sun, dressed with the best possible olive oil. The geometric perfection of a Roman mosaic floor. The smell of espresso in the morning. The golden silence of an afternoon in a Tuscan olive grove. The sound of the church bells counting the evening hour over the rooftops of a town that has been listening to those bells for 1,000 years. Italy is not a single thing. It is a conversation between many things, many regions, many dialects, many traditions, many centuries, that has been continuing for so long that the participants have found, without quite planning to, a way of speaking together that is rich and various and alive. It is the sound of a culture that knows who it is, ancient and modern, local and universal, serious in its pleasures and playful in its seriousness, devoted to beauty and unapologetic about it. The Mediterranean moves in its long, slow rhythm against the Italian shore. The stars appear above the clear dark of the alpine sky. The streets of Rome are quiet now, though a few figures still move through the old city, their footsteps sounding on the ancient stones. In a kitchen somewhere in Naples, someone is still talking, still pouring wine, still laughing at something said a few moments ago, the conversation going on because it is good, because there is no reason to stop while it is good. And somewhere in Tuscany, an old man is walking through his vineyard in the last of the evening light, touching the leaves of the vines he has tended for 50 years, reading in them the signs of the year to come. He is not thinking about the wine he will make, or the price it will fetch, or the weather forecast for the week ahead. He is simply here, in this particular place, at this particular moment, with this particular beauty around him. His feet know the earth, his hands know the leaves, and the light is perfect. This is Italy, and it has been an honor to walk through it slowly, together, in the long quiet of this night. Rest now. Rest well. The story continues. Thanks for watching. What culture would you like to learn about next? Comment below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you on the next one.